everyone, welcome back and welcome to 2026. So for the first video of the year, I want to talk about this Chet Baker box set that was put out by Newland Records. I think it came out sometime last fall. I just completely neglected it, even though I got it as soon as it came in. And just very recently, I saw that they posted something about there being limited stock. So I figured it was now or never if I was going to get the opportunity to not only tell you about it, but also you have the ability to then go out and get it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As always, please hit like, please subscribe to my channel, and you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at what_can_brown. All right, so let me cover some of the nuts and bolts of this release. Again, this is the box set. I think the official title is called 5 from 65, the Summer Quintet Sessions, and again by Chet Baker. So essentially this compiles 5 albums that were all recorded right around the same time. I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail. All led by Chet Baker, 4 Prestige records, again, recorded in 65, but they came out over a period of time. So let me first cover again some of the nuts and bolts. We'll get into the details of some of these albums as well, and I'm planning to share with you some of my favorite tracks too. So, all right, so 5 LP box set is what this is. That encompasses 5 original studio albums, all recorded in 1965. This is a all analog release, remastered and cut directly from the original analog mono tapes by Kevin Gray. Manufactured on 180 gram vinyl for each of those 5 discs. It's housed in reverse board deluxe sleeves, and I'll show each of those to you here shortly. There's actually a booklet that's included in here with liner notes from Grammy Award nominated James Gavin, who basically tells the story of all of these albums kind of collectively, and he weaves in quotes from Chet Baker and interviews that he's conducted with George Coleman, Kirk Lightsey, Herman Wright, and Roy Brooks, who are all in this lineup. And it includes some previously unseen photographs as well. And what we have sort of wrapped around it is this sort of heavy-duty lift-off box that sort of houses it all. So pretty sturdy thing, and pretty low profile here too as well. And I'll show you why that is, because each of these covers are actually a little bit more on the slim side in order to save you some space on the shelf. So they're not like each sort of thick gatefolds or anything like that. This would be a much larger box set if that was the case. So as far as the albums and the fact that there's 5, and I mentioned that they were all basically recorded at the same time. So they were recorded over the course of a single week in 1965, August 23rd, 25th, and 29th. So 3 dates produced Boppin, Groovin, Smokin, Comin, and Cool Burnin. Those are the 5 albums that are included in here, and incidentally, the only 5 albums I believe that Chet Baker recorded and that were released by Prestige. So in a lot of ways, this is a bit of a counter to Miles Davis's Quintet Sessions, right? So trumpeter led Quintet Sessions, Prestige released, and then even down to the inspiration for the actual names of these albums. So whereas Miles had Workin', Relaxin', Steamin', and Cookin', those weren't his only ones for Prestige, but those 4 were recorded the same like couple of sessions. So in a similar way, Chet Baker was sent into the studio to basically recreate that. Or if that wasn't fully the intent, at least that's how it was presented when these albums were finally released. So after this, after the recording of these sessions, Chet Baker would quickly go to World Pacific and record a number of pop-oriented albums that were arranged by Bud Shank, I believe. And so actually, to that point, before we get into this music, I actually want to put a finer point on where these albums stand in Chet Baker's discography, because I think it helps add a lot of, like, I don't know, context or like color to the sort of the story behind these releases. All right, so whenever you have a Chet Baker release, there's going to be like a little bit of like a sad story around it. And it's unfortunate, but that happens to be the case with this as well. So let me sort of paraphrase some of the story that is gotten into in the booklet, and also kind of combine in some of my research from some of these other albums to kind of tell you a little bit about what was going on at this point for Chet Baker. So as far as spacing these recordings out, consider this. All of the albums, as I previously stated, were recorded in 1965 across 3 sessions. Only after they were recorded so I say albums, like only after all of the three sessions occurred, was the music pitched to Prestige. So Prestige did not commission these recordings. They were recorded by a producer and they were pitched to Prestige. So Prestige bought them, and they released the first as the first session. They released Smokin. Okay, so this is the first of the five albums, and that was released in 1966. Chet Baker had finished his obligation for these, essentially what would be these become these five albums, and he goes over to World Pacific and records an album called A Taste of Tequila with the Mariachi Brass. This was his first of six albums for the label, all of which included the Mariachi Brass, I believe, which included a number of, again, Bud Shank sort of arrangements. And many of those albums are considered throwaways, purely commercial efforts with little substance. Some of that is my own words, and some of that's reviews that I've read. So, so for his After A Taste of Tequila, he records Hats Off as the second, followed by Quietly There, then Double Shot, then Into My Life, and then In the Mood. All of these were released in 1966. So essentially, we're starting with a Rudy Van Gelder session, the Prestige releases, and then there's like six albums that come out right around the same time to sort of cloud what was going on, I suppose, for Chet Baker. So Prestige releases the next album, Groovin, sometime in there in 1966 as well, but that's it for the year. So Chet is actually done recording with World Pacific by the end of 66. He has more issues with drugs, gets busted, and stops recording for a few years. During that window of time in 1967, when he's done with the commercial recordings and he's off the scene, Prestige releases Comin, Cool Burnin, and Boppin, the remaining albums of what would eventually become essentially the albums in this set. In 1967, Chet Baker also got convicted of at least forgery, if not some other drug-related charge, and I think he was awaiting sentencing when Prestige was releasing these albums. When he finally comes back to the scene and he's sort of on the other side of his sentence, he has his teeth knocked out and he struggles through albums like Albert's House, Blood, Chet, and Tears, both of which really aren't great. And he doesn't have much of substance come out for a while. So don't get me wrong, I do enjoy some of his later work, call it like into the mid or maybe more likely late 70s. But really, these quintet sessions that Prestige put out for Chet are a little bit of a last gasp, in my opinion, at least for the next decade or so. So I think my point in recounting this is like, talk about bad timing. To be releasing all of this music in the middle of a bunch of pretty terrible records that World Pacific was putting out in between prison sentences, and the man doesn't even have time or ability to tour really to support these albums. All right, so the unfortunate circumstances for Chet don't end there, because he was an unfortunate musician and had a lot of bad things happen to him. So all of this music, right, was produced by a guy named Richard Carpenter. So Richard Carpenter was a variety of things. He was an arranger. He did write music. He produced a number of Sonny Stitt and Dizzy Gillespie sessions. And when he put together this music, because I mentioned that Prestige did not commission these recordings, it was Richard Carpenter who did it. He had them recorded at a studio in New York, but he had the lacquers cut by Rudy Van Gelder. So when you look at the sort of history of these sessions and you see Rudy Van Gelder, Van Gelder in the runout, the stamp, the implication is that it was recorded at a studio, but it was not. So Rudy would have come into the city and recorded at this studio that Richard Carpenter designated. So the really interesting nuance here, which is actually gotten into great detail in the accompanying booklet that I mentioned, is that Richard Carpenter was known for screwing musicians over. So usually while vulnerable, he would have the rights to the music and even compositions that they wrote signed over to him. He would like give musicians an allowance and for the session, but in the end, probably really being the only person making much money and certainly making any residual income from these sessions. So he was the one indeed who booked booked these recordings. He chose the music, which by no coincidence were either his own compositions or compositions that he claimed to own the rights to. And only after these sessions were recorded did he shop the material around, and he sold it to Prestige for an advance of $12,000. So, the interesting thing is that I didn't know this context. In fact, like before this box set, I didn't know any of this context. I had a couple of these albums in their original form that Prestige put out, but I didn't know the backstory until I read the booklet. And the funny thing is that when I know that I'm going to make a video, I start writing down notes, just about some of the music, so that so that I can sort of speak intelligently about it, right? And the funny thing is, one of the things I wrote down was, it feels like the content was chosen for them. That's what I wrote down before reading the story in the booklet about Carpenter. And the reason why I said it actually is not because this isn't inspired music. I actually really like this music. But there is a preponderance of Sonny Stitt and Tad Dameron compositions, and then ones by Richard Carpenter himself. So, as I mentioned earlier about what he was known for doing, it turns out not only did he own the rights to his own music, which is, there's 16 of his own compositions, either him solo or him credited in combination with Sonny Stitt. He likely, I don't know that this is the case, but he likely swindled the rights out of the Sonny Stitt and Tad Dameron tunes that represent the rest of the music on these 5 albums. So basically, there's 4 compositions that are like Stitt solo, I believe, like purely credited to him. There's 7 that are credited to Dameron, and then there's like 16 that are credited to Carpenter. So all that being said, fortunately for us, the listener, what you don't have here are hokey covers of popular songs. It's a fairly serious affair, actually, in terms of the music. There's nothing that is commercial about it. All the musicians are playing with a sort of energy and in a seriousness and an intensity. And what I want to do is go through each of these albums just briefly, so you can see what comes up in the box set, and then I'll talk maybe a little bit about a couple of the songs on each that I think are the best. All right, so the first one I want to talk about is, and I believe that this is the order in which they were released, which actually corresponds with catalog numbers for Prestige. It's kind of one of the tells. But this is Smokin, right? Smokin with the Chet Baker Quintet, and maybe this is a good opportunity for me to tell you who is actually in the lineup. I know I referenced it earlier in terms of some of the folks who were interviewed for this session, or excuse me, for this box set. But you have Chet Baker on flugelhorn, not trumpet, and the reason is because I think leading up to this session, he had been borrowing somebody else's trumpet, because Chet was always like pawning his stuff for drugs, right? So he didn't own a trumpet at the time, and the only thing he was able to borrow on short notice was a flugelhorn, and that is the reason why he plays flugelhorn on this album. And I actually think it ends up being a really happy mistake, for reasons I'll get into. So Chet Baker on flugelhorn, George Coleman on tenor, Kirk Lightsey on piano, Herman Wright on bass, and Roy Brooks on drums. Now, fantastic lineup. Were they a actively touring group? Probably not. But this is a group of professionals who came together for these sessions, played a ton over these 3 dates, produced a ton of music, and I think it's a lot of really great stuff. So Smokin is no exception. Number of nice tunes on this, including the track Serenity, which I think is one of the highlights not only of this album here, but of the entire box set. You also have You Met Miss Jones, which is a track on this that highlights George Coleman, sort of showcases these sort of cascading runs, as well as some of his more slower melodic lines within the context of the piece and his solo. There's also the Sonny Stitt tune Rear and Back, which has a bit of a calypso feel. Incidentally, that track was actually included on Sonny Stitt's 1962 album for Argo, actually I think of the same name, the same title. So let's see what else to say. I think that the Chet Baker Quintet here takes it a bit different, with a lot more piano comping. At least it shows up on this particular album, which gives it a denser feel. And so what I mean by that is that when the soloists are performing, it feels to me like there's more piano comping than you would expect from a lot of hard bop tunes, where there's a little bit more space and a little bit more focus on the leader. Now, one of the reasons could be that Chet was here's the thing. I don't want to speculate on his state of mind for these recordings because you never really know whether him or Art Pepper, you never really know what was going on. Sometimes they would have off days just because they had off days, and sometimes they would sound great just because they were particularly inspired. But what I will say is that Chet Baker, I think, was sometimes given a little bit of help when you were a little bit like more concerned maybe about his ability to perform by having there be more comping. It could have given him a little bit more confidence to have some of the piano chords and lines in the background that gives him a little bit more to play with in terms of a solo. Because listen, the man was not playing a lot of virtuosic solos in the mid 60s. He did a little bit more of that, I think, in the 50s. But in the mid 60s, he was starting to slow things down a little bit. He was playing like almost like very early styles of smooth jazz in a way, or at least smoother jazz. Like he was forecasting 70s style, especially on the flugelhorn, way before a lot of other folks were. Maybe some of that was unintentional, but it is the case. So anyway, the effect I think on this is that you get a little bit more of a denser feel than maybe what you'd expect from a hard bop mid '60s album. Um, and I don't know. I always hesitate not to talk about, I guess, everybody because I feel like I've covered some of these, each of these folks except for Brooks and Wright. I will say that there's a drum feature towards the end of this album. Is it towards the end of the whole album? I forget, but there's a really nice drum feature here as well with Brooks and Wright. That's sort of just a really cool exchange of ideas. Um, but overall, and I'm not going to rank these, but I will say that this is probably near the top or maybe like top one or two of the five in the set. I just think it's really strong and definitely preview those tunes that I mentioned. All right, so I've kind of given you some context, I think, with that first one that's sort of applicable across these. So I'll try to cover the rest of them in a little bit, just a little bit with less detail. So this next one is Groovin, catalog number 7460, and I believe put out in 1966 as well. As far as same lineup, right? But as far as highlights, I'd say that the opener, which is Madison Avenue, really pulls you in. It's followed by an excellent ballad called Lonely Star. That's nice. I would say overall, from a vibe standpoint, this is a chiller album. Not quite as fast tracks, not quite as fiery solos. I mean, I already mentioned there's not like a tremendous amount of fiery solos, especially by Chet Baker. Certainly George Coleman, incorporates more of that feel. But I would say that this is overall just a little bit more of a restrained album, but still very, very beautiful. I mean, I would classify this at least in comparison as more chill out music, and maybe that's why it was called Groovin'. All right, so third is called Comin On. So this was put out in 1967, catalog 7478. So what to say about this? Well, George Coleman, he ends up stealing a lot of thunder, I think, across these five albums. That's not a bad thing though. There's a really great George Coleman highlight here on the title track Coming On. Kurt Lightsey also has a really nice feature on that track. Otherwise, I really like the piece Choose Now, which showcases, I think, a surprisingly smooth tone for Chet. So, in a way, I think it's songs like this, like Choose Now, and albums like this, I think that show just how much Chet was forecasting smoother jazz, like I kind of mentioned earlier, even more than somebody like Art Farmer, who was obviously known for playing the flugelhorn earlier than Chet was. I think Art Farmer was incorporating that instrument on like some ABC Paramount albums or something. But Chet does have a really nicely constructed solo, though, and I think that there's just something about the smoothness of it alongside the crispness of Roy Brooks's hi-hat that I think adds a really, really nice dynamic. So you could say that some of his playing style was a little bit by accident, although I think we sort of associate Chet Baker in his later years with playing with more restraint, somewhat out of necessity, but certainly the flugelhorn accentuates it. And I think though that combination has some of the best results here on Coming On. So I don't know. I feel like I led with, oh, this is like maybe my favorite album of the five, but I feel like for each of these there's a lot of there's artistic merit, and I think that there's even maybe a slightly different feel for each of these albums. All right, so the fourth album is called Cool Burnin', 1967, catalog number 7496. Interestingly, in the liner notes of this one, they actually proclaimed that now Chet is only playing flugelhorn, like it was a sort of a career decision, which is just a little bit ironic because he kind of left the scene fairly shortly after this, I believe. But the opener on this album is titled "Hurry," and it is a really great George Coleman and Chet Baker feature. The follow up is titled "I Waited for You." Really sensitive ballad. I think it's one of the highlights of this. And then the track that I absolutely have to mention, because I think that if anybody's skeptical about Chet's ability to turn out 5 albums like this in this format, I think that the song that's gonna surprise you the most and like intrigue you the most across all 5 of these is a song called Boudoir. So this one more so than others. Like it's not like this is a representative song. It's just a surprising song from this from this box set because it feels more modal. It feels more post bop than anything else that's on here. There's a lot of like kind of hard bop adjacent or cool jazz adjacent as well as ballads. And then you have Boudoir, which is just it's a little bit out of left field, but it is so good. It's got to be one of the best tracks for me across all 5 albums. All right, so the last one is titled Boppin. This came out in 1967, catalog number 7512. It must have been long enough since some of these earlier ones were released because it has the most extensive liner notes on the back, the most number of words, and they sort of reintroduce the sessions and really all of the other albums before it. And maybe Prestige just knew that this was going to be the last one and they wanted to kind of bookend it. This is another nice album as well, perhaps not as strong as some of those others, but I do really like actually the final track on A Misty Night has Baker on harmon mute, which is just a nice like soft and kind of swinging thing. I think it's a great way to end, again, bookend it. And then I also really like the opener, Go Go. It's a shorter one, but it's a lot more high energy, I think, than some of the other tracks, and those always stand out, I think, because again, we expect Chet to play a little bit moodier, a little bit softer, and it's nice, I think, that he's surrounded by some of these other musicians who bring the energy, and that seems to fuel Chet Baker's energy as well. So while I have this last one up for you, I know that I mentioned that these were a little bit sort of thinner profile or low, thinner jackets so that it fits in the box and doesn't take up as much space. So let me just kind of show that to you. You can kind of see that this, is plenty fine, obviously, to store the record. And each of these come with their own black and sort of poly-lined jackets to protect the record. But these are not these are like a textured matte kind of finish as opposed to glossy. This is something that Newland is doing, and I actually really like it for box sets. I think it works really well to have it be matte. This is very sharp, very professional. They've actually removed some of the original Prestige sort of verbiage or catalog number from this that keeps it a really clean feel and more focus, I think, on the artwork. And I gotta say, I really like it. Newland is not doing carbon copy of every little detail, right? Like some other labels are doing, and it's just it's just a choice, right? But certainly rest assured, these are somebody actually pointed this out, I think, on like another Newland review that I did. They said, "Oh, is that officially licensed?" All the stuff that this label does is officially licensed. So this one happens to be in partnership with Kraft Recordings and Concord, who own the rest of the Prestige catalog. So they would have licensed this material, gotten the rights to release this in this box set. So don't worry about that. All right, so now you know what it comes with, right? The albums and some of the details, some of my favorite tracks. I want to offer some additional commentary as I often do to kind of give you just my perspective, I guess, on this box set, and maybe addressing its historical worth as well. So with these 5 albums, right? You know that it's 1965. Chet doesn't sing on these albums, right? So Chet is just playing, and he's just playing flugelhorn, which again was only because he lost his horn, and it was the only thing that he could borrow. Um, as far as the style, I've pointed out that it is this almost like bridge style where he's not doing his virtuosic thing, but he's not fully into his smoother, slower, ballad heavy kind of style that he would get into well into the 70s after he lost his teeth. he still had his teeth for these recordings. But what you still do get is a little bit of a darker tone. Now, part of that is, again, it's going to be the flugelhorn, but it's Chet too. It's like his mood is like softer and more somber. And I think that with this mono presentation, it really showcases that mood well. You still get the sense of an earlier recording, like a classic recording. It's probably not as well recorded as if it was done in Van Gelder's studio. We'll say that, but it is a very lovely recording. You get a lot of detail from the instruments. You even get the valve noise, right? The keys, the valve noise from his flugelhorn. Um, but he's just more subdued. It's not his like 1950s sort of fiery self. And even when he is playing fast, he isn't virtuosic. Like that's not really the style that he was going for. Really, even maybe what necessarily he's kind of known for. I think that the point of Chet's playing at this time period was trying to play more personal music. And I think it's because I think it's advised by some of the struggles he was going through. Um, Whereas I think earlier in his playing, he was trying to reach others' expectations. And so that kind of drove a lot of his energy, but also his stress and how he sort of I don't know, took that out on himself. So to my earlier point about where these albums are in Chet's discography, this is, I think, one of the last periods of truly inspired playing. If not in total for Chet, at least for a while. So for those reasons that I just said, I think that there's a lot of historical worth or merit to these five albums. I think they're great. I think there's some people that may come to this and expect a certain Rudy Van Gelder sound or a certain sound because of the period for Prestige, but it is a little bit different in the ways that I just touched on. I also think that it's valuable music to hear the surrounding band that plays with Chet Baker here as well, because this is just a really, really stellar cast of musicians that gel really well, that are all, like I said earlier, just have a lot of energy, and they're bringing a lot of themselves to the table as well. Because listen, like it's not like this is Chet's music, and I think from reading the some of the notes, I don't think he was really instructing his fellow musicians to do much in the studio. I think he showed up to do the job, and they gelled through playing music and not through Chet's direction. I think that these musicians were able to bring themselves, and you hear that. You hear their own personalities across these five albums. Right, so let me close with some of the points about quality that I think that have been brought up by others, and a lot of times, these aren't necessarily things that matter as much to me, unless I personally have an issue with something related to the quality of the record. But it often feels like I'm like intentionally neglecting to mention, if I don't like bring in some of the stuff that I know is an issue with this box set. So the biggest issue that others have pointed out about this box set is actually pretty minor, but I think has frustrated some people, and that is the misprinting of the spine on two of the jackets. So on Cool Burnin' and on Smokin', the title on the spine says Boppin. So even though it actually has the correct number, the Newland's catalog number for it, they actually misprinted the name of the albums on two of them to say Boppin. So on the one that's supposed to be Boppin, it's accurately listed. So basically on three of these on the spine, they say Boppin. So, it is a mistake, obviously, but also after printing like 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 copies of this box set, I don't know what they went with. I don't know what you're supposed to do. Like redo it all. I'll say this as being a label owner now, or a co-owner, um, these kinds of projects are like borderline profitable anyway, for small labels. Like I'm not going to pretend to know Newland's situation, but or their cost model or anything like that. But these types of things are like borderline profitable. So is it a mistake, and should they have acknowledged it before it went to print? Yeah, should have had some better quality control, but it doesn't impact the music or your enjoyment of the box set. It's kind of one of those little things, and it's one of those things that maybe in the future people will be like, oh, this is how you know it's the original. it's the original pressing because it has the misprint. It's so funny because like if it was, if it was like a vintage record, people would be like, yeah, it's isn't it cool that it's the misprint? But people complain about it, in real time. So anyway, I acknowledge that that's an issue. I didn't have any issues though. In terms of the quality of the records, everything is flat and sounds great, and no little artifacts or noise. And so I didn't have any complaints otherwise. In fact, I didn't even notice the spine thing until people online pointed it out. But again, I know if I didn't point it out, people would be in the comments being like, that the spines are they're misprinted. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the last point that I wanted to bring up. And yeah, I guess other than I really enjoy this box set. I really like the choices that Newland makes. I like the content that they choose to license and to release. As somebody who's involved with the label, it makes me jealous that they actually have access to these recordings, because obviously we'd love to be able to access these maybe in the future. Not these specific ones, but you know what I mean. Like this kind of like stuff from the Concord catalog would just be a blast to be able to do. So I'm really happy to have this. I've only ever had two of the five albums in their original form before, and I hadn't heard the other three. So for me, this is a great opportunity to experience this music, to have it all together in one set. It's only $199, and I think that's pretty good for five record set with the booklet. I think that's pretty good. So anyway, like I led with, Newland did say that they may have some limited stock left of this because it has been out for some months now. So keep that in mind if it's something that you're considering picking up. Obviously, you can head to Newland and check it out, but know that Newland, I believe, is doing domestic U.S. distribution through other channels. So I don't know if it's like you can still order it from their website and it'll ship locally. That may be the case, but you may also be able to go to like Acoustic Sounds or something and see if they have it. So I don't know. Do some research, or maybe I'll put something down here that says like, hey, for US customers, you don't have to pay shipping from the UK if you order it from this place. I'll take a look at that. So anyway, as always, thanks for your attention, and I'll see you next time.